I say we get right into it. I don't have a beer with me. Are you ready?
I am indeed. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to Hard Compound, an American take on Formula One. We just finished watching Abu Dhabi, the final race of the year. One of the most controversial races of all time, as it turns out, and the deciding race for the 2021 Drivers' Champion. We have a content rich episode for you. We will break it all down, but first, son, I know what I'm drinking. I know what you're drinking. I need someone to explain what we just saw.
Yeah, unreal. I don't know if we should have expected anything different for the end of this season. Like you said, incredibly controversial. Mercedes launching multiple protests post race, both of which we now know were rejected by the stewards. So we do indeed have a world champion in Max Verstappen. But yeah, just utter craziness, a miracle from the racing gods for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. And the kid did the rest. One lap shootout between him and Hamilton, and Verstappen was able to take it. I mean, just a wild finish to the race, to the season. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm sure quite a few people are very upset, not the least of which is Toto Wolff and the Mercedes team. But I had a lot of fun watching this season. A lot more fun watching this season than the past several, just to see some actual competition, to see guys duking it out every single race was really a treat. And, hopefully the season isn't marred by some of the protests and controversies that happened throughout it, especially in this final race, because I thought it was just an incredible season. And I think we were really lucky to witness it this season.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it. We all want and we all deserve the championship to come down to the final race. We got even better. It came down to the final lap of the final race. I don't want to equate these as the same thing, but after Grosjean's horrific accident, we've discussed this before, we just assumed he died. And there's that clip, the famous clip, I think it's Carlos Sainz saying, how did he get out of that? That's an act of God. That final lap, there was no way. I mean, we had all done the math in our heads on those tires, fresher tires, but against that Mercedes, there was just simply no way Max was going to catch up to Lewis. It just was not going to happen. Math made it impossible. It was an act of God. Not that I wish to call Michael Masi God, but in this case, it was an act of Michael Masi. We've talked before about the stewards deciding races, and we absolutely do not want that to happen. We want the cars, we want the drivers, we want the pit crews, we want the strategists, the team engineers. That's who we want to decide the race. And we got a race that came down to, as I said, the final race, the final lap. I understand why there's controversy, but I do believe Michael Masi made the right decision. I know Toto was on the phone from Mercedes right away because they just sort of wanted this thing to end at that moment, possibly under a safety car. Lewis coasts into his 8th world championship, but that's been how Mercedes has been the past 8 years. They've had the dominant car. They have essentially coasted. They've been 1 and 2 every single year for the past, I believe, 8 years. They don't even understand how not to win. What we saw from Max this season, I mean, I think we have to go back to 2008, maybe even before that, but not since 2008 have we seen driving at this level. Alonso, has sung his praises, and Alonso is rare to do that. So it was just incredible. So I don't know. Anything else you wanted to say about that, about the decision, about Max, Lewis, any of it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start by saying this. I think both Max and Lewis should be extremely proud of the seasons that they had. Both of them fought tooth and nail through the entire season. We've spoken about it before. Hamilton is sitting pretty on 7 world championships. He holds the record for just about everything a driver can hold the record for, but he didn't rest on his laurels at all this season. He took it to Max right down to the wire and probably should have won this race if not for some just dumb luck.
Yeah, yeah. I think when Verstappen took it to him early in the season, I think he was shocked. He's a great driver, had the best car. And there were a few weeks, a few races where, you could see he had taken some haymakers and his knees were buckling. And to his credit, like you said, he has nearly every record in F1. He could have just accepted defeat. He did not. He picked himself up and took the battle to Max to the very end.
Yeah, yeah. And, same thing goes for Max. He's going against a 7-time world champion in a better car. And, he got knocked down a few times. His pin was knocked over when Bottas went bowling. He got taken out in that incident with Hamilton in the British Grand Prix. And, his lead in that championship dwindled down to something like 8 points after that weekend. Those are tough things to come back from, and he didn't give up. We've seen Mercedes and Hamilton dominate the second half of seasons in recent past. I think Vettel for a couple of seasons was ahead of Hamilton in the championship going into that August break and then got just crushed the rest of the season. Verstappen did not give up. He continued to fight. He put everything out on the track. And, he's been, I think, quite unlucky this season. But, in the 11th hour, the 11th hour and 59th minute, he got the best stroke of luck that he possibly could. And he ended up taking advantage of it. And I think that is what makes him special.
He did. Yeah. Yeah. He did. He was, he had so much bad luck. Bottas took him out. He had the issues, the crashes with Hamilton. He doesn't really have the best car, and he never gave up. You touched on Vettel and Ferrari taking it to Mercedes, but once you hit the second half of the season, the reliability just wasn't there, and that's why I thought the same would happen at the end of this season. It was just so much fun to watch Max. It was so much fun to watch Red Bull doing everything they could. And up until last week, they had a realistic shot at winning the constructors. But then Lewis on, I believe, the medium got the better start. Max had pole, I believe he was on the soft. I think typically Max is better at the start than Lewis, but not this race. And so I thought that's all she wrote. I don't think he's going to catch him. And then, Raikkonen got out. Giovinazzi was out. There were, some changes that happened in a typical race. But I can remember doing the math in my head and looking at seeing what, how much is Max gaining on Lewis this lap on fresher tires? How much on this lap? And you just look and it's like, okay, well, there's, 10 laps to go. It's not going to happen. So, it's just amazing. He drove, I think, better than anyone this season, and I think better than anyone in at least several years. And it came down to luck that he won, which I guess is one reason why we watch. It's sports. It's unscripted. It's crazy.
Yeah. Just a ton of fun, craziness at the end of that race. And, getting back to Michael Massey's decision there at the end of the race to not end the race under a safety car and to let lapped drivers through, I believe that was the right decision. Of course, there's controversy there. I think Lando Norris and George Russell both said that's not, what should have happened. But, I don't really know what else you want, right? Who wants to see the final race finish under a safety car? That's like the lamest way you could end this championship battle is, yeah, last lap, safety car. That's how we're going to end. I mean, give us something. And well, of course, Hamilton was hampered by that. He easily would have won the race without if that hadn't happened. But, he was still in front. It wasn't like Michael Massey or anybody handed Verstappen that final lap. They just gave him the opportunity to make it happen, and he did. So, I definitely understand where the frustration comes from, why there is controversy, but I totally believe that the right decision in that moment was made.
Yeah, I think he made the right decision in the moment. But I also think a lot of people, especially Hamilton fans and Mercedes fans, are overlooking, something very important. We don't want the stewards involved, but sometimes they have to be. We certainly don't want them involved after a race. Sometimes they have to be. We don't want them involved during a race. Sometimes they have to be. And if they have to be, we want it to be by the book and or as fair to all the drivers as possible. Lewis should not get an advantage. Just last week, we were discussing how we thought the stewards were giving Lewis advantages sometimes.
Mhm.
We don't like that. But more important than not giving a driver or a team an advantage is you need to do what's right by the sport. And this sport is motor racing. This is a sport that through COVID has still somehow miraculously pulled off 22 races around the world. And we got to saw a great battle that came down to the wire. Michael Massey's decision, I think, was the right one in the time. And it was not necessarily fair to Lewis, but it was right by the sport. And I think that's what's most important. Max deserved this win, and he got it. And, I can understand why Lewis might be upset. I definitely understand why Mercedes is upset, but I think this was the right call.
I agree with that. It's just a stroke of luck for Verstappen. I mean,
that was, yeah, incredible.
yeah, you can be upset and frustrated with it as much as you want, but sometimes things just happen. I mean, what happened in Baku, right? Verstappen was out in front by a mile and his tire exploded. I mean, things happen and it sucks, and you don't necessarily want them to influence the outcome of this championship battle, but sometimes things can't be helped, and you have to take advantage of every circumstance that you have. I think Hamilton pretty much did throughout the entire season. He took advantage of every circumstance that went against Max, save for that Baku thing where he, totally screwed up, and I think Perez took advantage of that. So the season is 22 races long. Both of these drivers were separated by, what did it end up being? 6 points, 8 points?
Yeah.
So just unreal driving from both of them, a crazy season, and came down to the wire. I don't know. It was fun.
It was fun. This was one of the most fun seasons we've seen in years. For me, it goes back to when Lewis and Alonso were battling on the same team. And it's been a while, I think, since we've seen this kind of fierce racing that goes throughout the season by racing greats, each with a car capable of winning.
Yeah.
So that was the last race of the season. It was a great one. We don't do driver of the day, we do driver of the week. Let's do it. Going in reverse grid, 20 through 1. Why don't you give me your bottom 5 of this final race of the season?
Sure, sounds good. I am going to leave out Mazepin just because he wasn't able to race. So we'll do 19 to 1 for me at least. So we'll start bottom 4 here, 19 to 16. I have George Russell as 19.
Wow.
He had not a good weekend, out qualified by his teammate again for only the second or third time ever.
Right, right, right. And I think twice in the past month, I think.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And then, not a great race, was a back marker, and then had to retire the car. Tough weekend for him. So he's my bottom driver. I fully expect him to be near the top most races next season with Mercedes, but final race of the season was not too great for him. Then I have, unfortunately, the old man, Kimi Raikkonen, in 18th. I don't know what he was saying his farewells before this weekend. I think he was just out there having a good time in a bad car, and then had to retire from the race.
yeah.
So
Kimmy's been putting in European hours lately. I think he calls it a day at like 3 o'clock. He
yeah.
shows up at 10, 2 hour lunch, ends the day at 3.
Yeah, yeah. He'll be missed for sure. He's just been in the sport for so long. But this weekend, I'm pretty sure he was checked out before he got in the car. Then another fan favorite, Daniel Ricciardo, I have 17th. He did not perform well this weekend. Last weekend, he did quite well for himself. I think he's been, like I kept saying, on and off this season, hot and cold. This weekend, he had another tough weekend, and I think just didn't perform very well in that McLaren. And then 16th, I have Latifi. I think he did some good things this weekend. He outqualified George Russell. He did okay for himself in the race, but then, of course, caused that whole safety car situation there at the end of the race. You know, was battling with Schumacher, got into the dirt and sort of scuffed up his tires a little bit. And then, that kind of didn't give him good enough traction going into another turn, and he lost it and smashed into the wall, and that's all she wrote. But for
That's all
me,
she wrote.
he did some good things, but ultimately when you crash, that's not a good thing. So
Right. I think I don't agree with this, but I think the case can be made that in 2022, Latifi was a better teammate to Max than Checo Perez. if if not for today's crash, Max Verstappen would not be champion. I'm generally in agreement with you. I do have 20 Mazepin. Mercifully for Haas, he had COVID. He could not race. They didn't even bother putting a car out. And, I'm sure they employ a reserve driver. They didn't bother with that. And so they just ran one car, just another sort of embarrassment for Haas in 2022. Then I have Raikkonen. I've never had any affinity for Raikkonen, but back in his day and with Ferrari, he was a fierce driver, and so that was always fun to watch. Seeing a fierce competitor, always lights out. But it seems like, as I said, he's been putting in European hours the past few races, and on his final race in Formula One, poor qualifying, poor race, and then he had to have the car retired. Then 18, I have Russell. Russell's going to take a lot of flack from fans over his sort of taking exception to Michael Massey's ruling today, but the fact is Russell has just had a poor winter. Once again, got up qualified by his teammate Nicholas Latifi. He had a poor race. He was retired. I have him in 18th. I then have Schumacher. I like him. I realize he's in a bad car. That Haas has had no points all year long, but he was mostly a non-entity this weekend in this race. Then I have Giovinazzi, just sort of the odd man out. He's just really not done much. His claim to fame is he's Italian and he races for an Italian team, and that in qualifying he does as well as the aged Kimi Raikkonen, and that's just not enough to earn a spot in F1. So I have him at 16. So let me do my 15 through 11. I have Sebastian Vettel. Vettel, again, he's a smart driver. He's a veteran driver, former champion. I keep assuming his veteran presence is going to help his teammate Lance Stroll and help the Aston Martin team. But week in, week out, he seems to have disappointing results. I then have Daniel Ricciardo. I think you had him rated a little bit harsher than I have. I really thought after the summer break that he had turned a corner, and I thought we were going to see him really get more out of that McLaren, really take it to his teammate Lando Norris. And a couple times that's been the case, but overall, I think this is a poor season and a poor race. Daniel Ricciardo, he's fun. Everyone seems to like him. He's a veteran driver, he's a solid driver. But I think McLaren had a legit shot at coming in third this year, and they did not. And I think they did not entirely because of Daniel Ricciardo. I next have Latifi at 13. Not a great race, but he did outqualify his teammate George Russell, even though I think Russell is the more talented driver. And again, if not for Nicholas Latifi, Max Verstappen would not be world champion. Number 12, I have Valtteri Bottas. I'm not sure what Bottas is doing. I am in 100% agreement with Toto Wolff that he should no longer be driving for Mercedes. Not a good weekend, not a good race. He seemed to be in the middle of the pack all race long. He did nothing to help Lewis on this most important of weeks. So I have him at 12. And then I have Lance Stroll, Aston Martin. I expected so much more from Aston Martin this year, especially from Aston Martin and Seb Vettel, but also somewhat from Lance Stroll. He had a better weekend than his teammate Vettel, but still not anything special. So that sort of rounds out my bottom 10.
Yeah, for most of those, I agree with you. There are a few that I might catch you out a little bit for me, but here I'll start with my 15 through 11 to round out my bottom 10 as well. So in 15, I have Stroll. He, I felt, was once again a non-entity. He pretty much what Lance Stroll does most of the time. He just kind of sits back there. Vettel outraced him today. I don't know. This year as a whole, I've been extremely disappointed with that Aston Martin team. You know, after a pretty incredible season last year, them coming into this season, I expected them to do a lot more, and neither one of those drivers has really done a whole lot this season.
You're right. I'm probably holding Vettel to a higher standard than Stroll. That may explain why I have him higher. Because, yeah, but both of them, you're right. Just poor year, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in 14, I have Giovinazzi. He just kind of meanders along. I think, he's definitely been better than Raikkonen the last few weekends, but in that Alfa Romeo hasn't really done a whole lot. And this weekend was no different. And then, unfortunately, another retiree from the race. Then I have Charles Leclerc. I do hold Leclerc to a high standard, I think, because I believe he's one of the most talented drivers on the grid. But for me, he's very raw. It seems like sort of unrefined. I think he makes quite a few little mistakes here and there. And I think he did not only in qualifying, but also during the race, which, I think cost him, several places, several seconds here and there. And, Sainz got up on the podium, kind of a gift for him, but, he was able to, whereas his teammate Charles Leclerc, was down, getting lapped pretty easily from some of those top drivers. So he is 13th for me. Then I have Bottas as well. we keep saying he has one job, and it's different than most of the drivers on the grid. It is to come in second place and to help Hamilton win. Very clearly, he did not do his job today. So he's my 12th driver for this weekend. And then I have Vettel, another Aston Martin disappointing season. He did acceptably in this race, but nothing special from him. I believe he should do and can do much better than what he's done throughout this season and in this weekend.
Yeah, those are great. Give me your 6 through 10.
Yeah, so 6 through 10, some of these are starting to get hard for me. But I think, 10, 9, and 8, I'm pretty confident in my decision to put those guys there. So I have Norris 10th.
Wow.
He did pretty good in that McLaren most of the weekend. I think he was 3rd in qualifying. He had a great qualifying session.
He did.
Had a bit of a tough race, but got a puncture at one point, so had to come in to the pits and lost several places from that. But on the whole, much better weekend than his teammate Ricardo, who I think should be much closer to him. And I think most of this season, Norris was much, much better than Ricardo. He really took the fight to Ferrari this season. And if Ricardo had done the same, I agree with you. I think they had a legit shot at getting third in that constructors championship. So a good weekend for him, but sort of a tough race day. So I have him down at 10. Then in 9 and 8, I have Ocon and Alonso. Both did pretty well. The Alpine, I think, is one of the better cars in that middle group. And I think both drivers, got on the points, did what they were supposed to do. I think they did quite well for themselves this weekend. So I have them 9 and 8. Then this one will shock you. At number 7, I have Mick Schumacher.
Wow.
The Haas is garbage. It's a horrible car. He was very close in qualifying, I thought at least, to getting into Q2. I think it was maybe a half a second, whereas usually the Haas is like at least a second back from getting into Q2. So I thought he did a really solid job in qualifying. And then, he was battling throughout the race. We saw that battle with Latifi that ultimately caught Latifi out. Mick Schumacher was giving him a run for his money in a significantly worse car. I mean, the Williams isn't good, but the Haas is way worse. It's like, I don't know, probably like the Red Bull to Ferrari comparison is what I would say Williams to Haas is. So, I think he had no business challenging Latifi there and, kept him at bay most of that time, won that battle. And I thought he did really well this weekend. Maybe I'm giving him this high of a position just because I want a Haas to be up there. I want him to do well. So I might, be kind of a little bit, giving him a little bit more credit than maybe he's due, but I thought he did really well this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd judge Schumacher too harshly for this weekend because he essentially was a non-entity for the most part. And though I realize he's in a horrible car, but I think one thing we've all seen, I was certainly skeptical about Schumacher coming into F1. And I think repeatedly, and certainly over the course of this season, he's shown he belongs in F1. It's great to see a Schumacher still in Formula One. I know he's in a terrible car. I don't agree with you for where he should rate this race, but he's definitely proven he belongs.
Yep. I think he's been a good young driver in a very bad car. I mean, kind of like how we saw George Russell, the last several seasons in that Williams, where it just wasn't even close to competing with anybody, but you could see the talent was there. You could see that he belonged in F1, and that's why he's going to Mercedes next year. And I think, Mick Schumacher, if he keeps up what he's done this year, he'll go to a team that can compete, which is, I think, an exciting prospect for the sport.
Yeah.
So getting back to my rankings, in 6th, I have Pierre Gasly. Once again, just a really solid drive in that AlphaTauri. I mean, what a year for him. I'm shocked that he's still going to be on that team next year and not somewhere better, but he's done exceptionally well this season. He had a really solid performance this weekend. And, I fully expect him to eventually be on a team that can compete for wins and podium finishes consistently.
Yeah, those are great. I do love how well Gasly has done this season. Watching him come back from the demotion at Red Bull and seeing him, challenging Alpine, challenging McLaren and Ferrari week in, week out. That's great to see in a lesser car. So I'll do my 10 through 6, and then I'll do my 5 through 1. In 10th place, I have Leclerc. I think he's a solid driver. We've seen so much from him, but it seems as if the Ferrari car has gotten better. He's gotten worse, and I don't understand it. Another weekend where I think when you add it all up, qualifying, race, He was fine, but that Ferrari can do better than what we've seen from Charles Leclerc in the last several races, in my opinion. So I have him at 10. I have Gasly at number 9. I think Gasly has had a great season. I love seeing what he's doing in that AlphaTauri. As I said, he takes it to the mid pack week in, week out. This weekend, not so much. I think this may have been the first week where his teammate Yuki out-qualified him and out-finished him. So I'm putting Gasly at 9. Then I have Ocon and then Alonso. Alpine has done better this year than I expected them to. Ocon has done slightly better than I expected him to. He's pretty much kept up with Alonso, and that's not an easy thing to do. So I have them 8th and 7th, and then 6th. My surprise pick, number 6, is Lewis Hamilton.
Ooh.
Yeah, Lewis has had another great year. He almost won the Drivers' Championship. Had it not been for some fluke accident and some crazy luck not going his way for once, he would have been champion. But, in what I think is a better car, Max did get pole. When it came down to a final one-lap shootout, Max outraced him. Again, maybe I'm judging him too harshly, but I think he could have done more. I think Max wore him down. This is a long season, and I think Max just wore him down and just never gave up. So I have Lewis at 6. Now my top 5 through 1. Number 5, Checo Perez. I expected more from Checo this year. I think had he delivered what I think is reasonable, that Red Bull could have actually won the Constructors' Championship. He's too much not helped Max out, I think, but in this race, he certainly did. There were several laps, maybe a few, where he did his best to sort of hold Lewis in check, even though Lewis's car at the time was faster. So I thought that was a good job on Checo's part. I then next have Lando. You, I think, have judged him too harshly. I think over the course of the weekend with qualifying, with racing, I thought he did a solid job in a car not quite as good. Then I have Carlos Sainz. Sainz has really, really shown these last couple of months, these last several races for Ferrari. I think he's now out driving his teammate, Charles Leclerc, who's been with Ferrari for a few years now. And Carlos Sainz had a great race. Number 2, Yuki Tsunoda. I've been so harsh on Yuki. I've even said I don't think he'll be in F1 by the end of the 2022 season. I think he's just failed to deliver reasonable expectations week in, week out. But this weekend, I don't know what happened. He outqualified his teammate. He outraced his teammate. He had great qualifying, great race. He really did himself and the AlphaTauri proud, and so I have him at number 2. Number 1, the obvious, the man who was relentless, who never gave up, who did everything he could, and he's now world champion, Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Of course. Yeah, there's not much else to say there. He's world champion. He got a miracle, but he took it and just won that race. I mean, what an unbelievable way to finish the season for him. He's my number 1 driver this week too. I mean, just incredible, and an incredible storyline. I in my crazy predictions last week sort of wrote a Netflix screenplay, but I think this race sort of gave us a better one. I mean, it's film worthy, just what happened and what Max Verstappen was able to accomplish in this race and throughout the season is just incredible and just amazing. So I will roll through my 5 through 1, but of course Max Verstappen, world champion, is the top driver of the day or the weekend, I suppose. So at 5, I have Yuki. I'm with you. He had a great weekend for one of the first times, potentially the first time this season. He out-qualified his teammate Gasly, and he did outrace him and finished, was he 4th or 5th? I don't remember, but I mean, great weekend for Yuki. A really, really good way to end the season for that young driver. I think something he desperately needed going into next season. So really good way to end the season for him. Then I have Carlos Sainz, getting on the podium once again. Finally, he's actually able to step on the podium this time. He isn't sort of given that position post celebrations. Another great race for him. He really came on strong in the last couple of months and outraced and just beat out his teammate Leclerc through sort of the second half of the season. That is going to be an intense teammate battle next year, I think. And if Leclerc can kind of get his stuff together next season, I think I said this last week, but I really believe that Ferrari, that team, can challenge for a constructors title. Those two drivers are good enough to compete with anybody so long as the car is there.
That would be great to see, because I think when we look at next year's teams, Mercedes with Lewis and Russell,
Mhm.
that might be the top team. Plus, they'll have that great car, and Max and Checo in the Red Bull. But I think you're right. Over the course of a long season, Ferrari can get that car a little bit better. Those two very solid drivers, very reliable, week in, week out. I think you might be onto something. I think Ferrari could challenge for the constructors next year.
Yeah, would be a lot of fun to see. Then, sort of the ultimate teammate this weekend, I have Checo Perez as my third driver of the weekend. I think he did a good job qualifying. He did an excellent job at the start of the race, getting up right behind his teammate, Max Verstappen. And then when it came down to it, doing everything he could to hold up Hamilton to help Verstappen win the race. Due to sort of unfortunate circumstances, he had to retire from the race and therefore didn't get a podium. But I thought he had an excellent weekend. Like you said, throughout the season, he probably could have been a better teammate. He probably could have helped Red Bull clinch that Constructors World Championship if, he had raced better throughout the season. But when it came down to it this weekend, he really, really helped out his teammate and put in a really solid performance himself, I thought.
He did, and I checked in because they retired him.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure why. And Red Bull did confirm that essentially they thought there were concerns about him finishing, and they absolutely did not want any more chaos on the track, another virtual safety car or something like that.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, my top two, they've done it all season long and we're special again in this race. I have Hamilton at 2. He easily could have been the top driver of the weekend. I mean, put in an exceptional performance today during the race. By sheer luck, he was caught out and didn't win the race, but he easily could have by 10, 15, 20 seconds. I mean, his pace in this race was just astonishing. I mean, he was light years ahead of even Max. I mean, it was crazy what he was doing.
You're probably right. I mean, he had that great start, and I mean, look what he did compared to Bottas, his teammate in the same car.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was pretty incredible. I don't really understand what happened in qualifying because, Verstappen, I think, outqualified him by 3 or 4 tenths of a second, which is a lot in qualifying terms in Formula One. But Hamilton today was just a man on a mission. He was on fire. He was putting in fastest laps consistently, and there was no way Verstappen was ever going to catch him without the help of that safety car. So, he's my number 2 driver of the day only because Max Verstappen is my number 1 driver because he won the world championship. I mean, that's enough to get you driver of the weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, I think, amazing performances from both of those drivers throughout the entire season. Craziness and then lots of races, comings together in lots of races. But, they gave us a really remarkable season. They both drove incredibly well throughout pretty much the entire season. And, that's sort of what racing is about. And it's nice to see real hard racing for a full season.
Yeah. We've had many years where not necessarily the driver who did the absolute best won, or, sometimes we're not getting to see the very best because they're having car issues. Their car's not as fast or unreliable. But this was such a great season. I agree with you about Max, and I do think it's one of those years where the best driver won. He put on a show all season. F1 put on a show all season. So it was just so much fun to watch. I wanted to go real quick and give some thoughts on the constructors because I did have a few thoughts and then I wanted to pick your brain on them. No surprise that Mercedes won again. They have the fastest car, the most money. They've dominated this turbo hybrid era. But it was fun to see Red Bull take it to Mercedes and with about 2 races left, still have a legit shot at winning their constructors. So I'm really excited about Formula One going forward because now with some spending caps, I think we're going to see a lot more competition. I think it's been since 2009 when we've had someone other than Red Bull or Mercedes, the teams with the most money, win. And I really think we're going to see some much more competitive racing, not just driver against driver, but team against team, which is why I really am hopeful about your Ferrari prediction. They could win a constructors as early as next year. I will say this about Ferrari. Looking at them over the past 2 seasons, I thought how far they've fallen. And yet this year, I realized they were a couple 100 points back, from even being in second place. But I mean, they had solid races, solid car all year long. McLaren, I think McLaren, I mean, it's been great to watch McLaren's rise from the ashes over the past 6 or so years. They've really gone from a team that was almost like Haas to a team that I think could have come in third in the constructor. And Daniel Ricciardo cost them that chance. Alpine, Alonso and Ocon, that turned into a fun team. Good car. They've been fun to watch. AlphaTauri, same thing. They've been fun to watch. The young guys, Yuki and Gasly. Aston Martin might be, I think, the most disappointing team for me. They have the great name. They had that Mercedes engine. They were so good last year. I don't know what happened. It was nice to see Williams not be in last place again, as they had been for so many years. And so maybe the team that came in ninth, Alfa Romeo, I don't know what's going on there. They used the Ferrari engine. That actually could be the most disappointing team. They only got 13 points. Kimi Räikkönen and Giovinazzi, Alfa Romeo, only 13 points. That to me is inexplicable. And then Haas. I mean, when Haas entered, they had a good 1.5 seasons, and then they've just sort of fallen off. The sort of the charm of the American team, the charm of the poor team, just sort of scraping by, getting a car constructed, getting it out there on the grid, doing the best they can. I think that charm has gone away when you have an entire year where they don't even score 1 point. But I think this has been one of the best seasons in Formula One in decades. Maybe the best since, let's say, 2008, or you can even go back to the 90s. And I'm really looking forward to 2022. Any thoughts on the constructors?
Yeah, I'm with you about a lot of that. Some of those backmarking teams were really disappointing this season. I think, the case can be made for Aston, Alfa Romeo, and Haas to be among the most disappointing this season. Aston Martin, after last season, just an unreal season, crazy good. I know they got a lot of flack for basically being a Mercedes vehicle from like 2019 or whatever it was.
Right.
But, they had an awesome season. Sergio Perez was 4th in the Drivers' Championship in a racing point. That's pretty crazy. And for them to have fallen as far as they did, for Vettel to be where he was, and Lance Stroll to just sort of be another backmarking Canadian that didn't really get much done is really disappointing.
Ouch.
So I'm with you. I just think, that team's going to need to do a lot more next season. They're going to have to be a lot more competitive with Alpine and AlphaTauri. That's where they should be. They should be competing with those guys, and they absolutely were not this season.
Yeah, Aston, again, I think how good a season they had last year, Stroll, the owner, his statements and his financial commitments to the team all led us to believe they would compete for sort of that third or fourth spot. They came in seventh, and it was, it was a distant seventh.
Yeah, it was not close to AlphaTauri or Alpine, which is it's just an unfortunate thing. It would be more fun to have, consistent battles, with more drivers up there. So the same thing kind of goes for Alfa Romeo. When you lose out to Williams, that's a disappointing season. You need to be better. And I'm pretty sure they're well aware of that because both drivers are gone next season. Obviously, Kimmy's retiring, but I mean, you're bringing in fresh faces, and I think that's necessary.
It's definitely necessary. I certainly hope there's kind of a reworking of the entire team, the car, the structure, everything. Because, yeah, if you're Alfa Romeo, Ferrari engine, to get 13 points over 22 races is almost inexplicable.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And then, Haas sitting there in last place with 0 points. I think they kind of knew that that was the direction they were heading. And so, bounced out Grosjean and Magnussen, so they were no longer in Formula One, and brought in Schumacher and Mazepin, who have the name and the money. So it's sort of not surprising the moves that they made, because I think they were pretty sure of where their car was going to be. And it's unfortunate to have a car like that in Formula One, just never even being close to anybody. We saw that for a couple of seasons with Williams. They were just never close to anybody. And that's never fun to watch. So, I'm hoping that, next season and in the future, they can get back to being competitive among those sort of middle pack teams competing for points.
Yeah, I've sympathized with Haas and the owner, Gene Haas, sort of demanding spending caps put into Formula One and rules put into Formula One so that there can be much more competition. So a Mercedes is not going to outspend by 10x Haas, for example. But in the same token, I hope Formula One puts in floors, spending floors, for example, and competitive floors. It's like, look, your car has to be competitive. I mean, when you think of some of the craziness over some races, rain, crashes, 22 races, Haas doesn't even get 1 point. That's embarrassing. That should never happen. There needs to sort of even be relegation considered, I think, in Formula One. You have to make a car that's competitive. You can't just sort of buy your way onto the grid and in a car that will never do anything.
Right. Yep. I totally agree with that. It's frustrating to not see competition, and that goes both directions, right? You have to put in enough to be competitive, but there also has to be a way to sort of limit how much you can put in so that the competition remains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just sort of to finish up going through some of these teams, I am excited about the prospect of McLaren and Ferrari coming up and trying to be competitive with Mercedes and Red Bull. That will be exciting if it happens, a four-way race. And then, all those middle teams that don't have the same kinds of budgets, AlphaTauri, Alpine, and the rest competing with each other. I think it's exciting when you get closer races, when you get more competition, and it makes the sport more fun, and I think it makes it more engaging for new fans to come into. And that's really what I hope happens with the new regulations moving forward.
Yeah, we love to see great battle for first, but we also just love to see great battles throughout the grid at every turn, every lap, all the teams competing. So I'm with you. I hope that's what we see in 2022 and beyond. Across the line, that's our segment where we predict the podium for the next race, and not just the top 3, but who we think will show up in the top 5. There is no next race. We are finished for the year, but I would like to know what the results were. I don't believe our predictions were very good, but the way Across the Line works is we choose who we think will show up in the top 5. Once a driver is selected, he's no longer available to the other person. If that person does show up in the top 5, they get 1 point, I believe. If we predict their correct spot, their finishing spot, they get 5 points. Is that correct, Patrick?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and so what were the results this year?
Yes. So for the season, our inaugural season of Across the Line, I was absolutely demolished by you.
I think you went with your heart too much.
You beat me 47-26.
Wow. 47 is that's Williams' numbers. So your numbers were getting Haas territory.
To be fair, we only did it for about half of the season. So we started late on this segment. But I mean, yeah, I got crushed. I'm hoping to come back and be a little bit more competitive. I'll put in a little bit more effort next year. So hopefully we get a more intense across the line competition.
Yeah, and we can even look to see if is getting the right driver in the right slot worth 5. Maybe that should only be 3, but we'll figure out the math later. We have several months now until the next race. Speaking of which, we also always give a crazy prediction for the next race. We are done for this season. Do you have any crazy predictions? Does some wayward Stewart declare Lewis the winner? Will we see some craziness at preseason or at the very first race? What's your crazy prediction, Patrick?
Yeah, I think there's always sort of a fiasco of, media craziness that goes on in the off season, and once we get into sort of the testing in Barcelona, that always happens and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure we'll see just some crazy headlines that happen. But I do have a crazy prediction for 2022. It's sort of 2 separate but sort of similar crazy predictions. So first, in 2022, Lewis Hamilton will not win the Drivers' Championship.
Okay.
I don't know that that's all that crazy, but the second part I do believe is sort of crazy, and that is if Hamilton does not win the Drivers' Championship in 2022, he will retire from Formula One racing.
Wow. That one I think is crazy because I'm not quite sure what sort of spiritual and or nutritional and or emotional advice the blonde woman that's always on his tail is giving him. But if she's saying retire after next season, I think that's bad advice. But I would like to see it just so your crazy prediction could come true. And how about testing in Barcelona? Wouldn't you like a job where they say, hey, you know what, just sort of to get you in the swing of things, we're going to send you to Barcelona.
Yeah.
That's the sort of job we all need. My crazy prediction is this. I think this is a good one. So there have been 4 drivers in Formula One that have won their first championship under the age of 25. Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen. And coincidentally, all 4 will be on the grid next year. My crazy prediction is all 4 will win a podium. They will win a race, all 4.
Nice.
I Yeah, I think that one could come true. Son, this has been a good discussion. There will be no podcast next week as there is no race, but at the start of the year, I want to let our listeners know we are going to have the inaugural Effies. That is our Formula One awards show. We want you to tune in for that. That's it. Great discussion, son. I want to thank our listeners for listening to everybody's most beloved father and son F1 podcast. A great season, and we are lights out.
See you, everyone. Thanks for listening.